Gospel of Luke. This is actually the lectionary text for today. Luke chapter 13, verses 1 through 9. About that time, some people came up and told him in this case is Jesus, about the Galileans Pilate had killed while they were at worship, mixing their blood with the blood of the sacrifices on the altar. Jesus responded, "Do you think those murdered Galileans were worse sinners than all other Galileans? Not at all. Unless you turn to God, you too will die." And those enlightened in Jerusalem the other day, and those 18 in Jerusalem the other day, the ones crushed and killed when the Tower of Siloam collapsed and fell on them, do you think they were worse citizens than all other Jerusalemites? Not at all. Unless you turn to God, you too will die. Then he told them the story. A man had an apple tree planted in his front yard. He came to it expecting to find apples, but there weren't any. He said to his gardener, "What's going on here? For 3 years now I've come to this tree expecting apples, and not one apple have I found. Chop it down. Why waste good ground with it any longer?" The gardener said, "Let's give it another year. I'll dig around it and fertilize, and maybe it will produce next year. If it doesn't, then chop it down." I'm going to begin this morning by asserting a highly personal opinion. In the days following the tragic shootings last December at Sandy Hook Elementary School, those of our national media committed a second violation that for some parents felt almost as devastating. Now, I for one believe the news media tends to spend a lot of its time creating as much news as it reports. And one of their best sources for finding a story to cover is to take the pulse of the American people and determine what it is we might be currently terrified of. You've heard those teasers for the late night news broadcast. Your child could die from this common household item. Tune in at 10, right? Well, that's what I think happened, actually. In the hours and days that followed the Newtown tragedy, the media, at least in part, left the facts of the case behind to begin a speculative quest for the motives and preoccupations of the killer, Adam Lanza. It's not news to anyone that Adam Lanza was a kid who wasn't normal. Normal kids don't murder other kids with premeditation and zeal. But the truth is, we will never know exactly why he did what he did that unseasonably warm December morning. And yet, in response to our fears that it could happen to our kids in our schools, the media digs through the bones of Lanza's life, looking for any clue that might assuage our fears and make us feel he was such an aberration, such an anomaly, that there is no way he could surface in our backyards. And so there I was, the parent of a kid who dabbles on the autism spectrum of a disorder called Asperger's, hearing the media speculate that Mr. Lanza's Asperger's diagnosis may have led him to do this heinous thing. It was a crushing blow. Suddenly, parents all over this country, parents of sweet, gentle children who struggle daily with the challenges of Asperger's, were having to defend their children as not likely to commit a violent crime against other kids. Now, I watched a lot of this from the fringes of the blogosphere and felt, probably in many ways, the way Jesus felt. That we human beings are so eager for the easy fix, we will throw almost anyone under the bus. It is exasperating, to say the least. Okay, stepping off my soapbox now, not out of the pulpit. I know that you get what I'm saying here. The truth about our scripture for today is that Jesus is having none of it. The people come to Jesus and ask him to be their insurance salesman. You know the guy, like a good neighbor, and you're in good hands. You know, right? Yeah, okay. Well, that's what these folks want. And they're not necessarily bad people for wanting it. But Jesus does not find himself in a particularly indulgent mood this day. They want to know, these fearful ones, of course, that those who were killed by Pilate's wrath and those who died in the horrific accident when the tower fell over got what they had coming to them. And what these folks are really asking is, what is the formula? What are the incantations and spells that I must perform to guarantee my safety? Please, insurance salesman Messiah, be our good neighbor. Spell out the policy that sets us apart and saves us from this fate. But Jesus isn't an insurance salesman. He is a wisdom teacher. And like any good wisdom teacher, he is going to force these people into that uncomfortable, emotional crevice we call ambiguity. Instead of offering them a predictable reward and punishment God, he gives them a God who sets the sun and the rain upon both the righteous and the unrighteous. The people ask him for an explanation, and the wisdom teacher offers them instead an invitation. It is an invitation into the heart of the good news and into the life of Jesus' own story. Jesus starts by inviting them to mind their P's and Q's. Not in a threatening way, I don't think, but rather in a level playing field kind of way. Taking the didactic approach, he says to them, you are no different from anyone else. Bad things happen to good people every day of the week. And death is a reality for every human being. But having a relationship with God, the wisdom teacher tells them, will ease your fears and set your hearts upon the salvation that really matters. However, Jesus knows his audience well. These folks are not going to get it if he leaves them with just a lecture. And so Jesus, being Jesus, tells them a story. Now, this is a weird little story. It is. It is a story that I think was meant to be a feel-good story about second chances and the underdog coming back from behind. But I warned you that Jesus is in a peevish mood today. So the story leaves us more scratching our heads than wiping away tears of inspiration and relief. So there's this apple tree, you see. It sits in the front yard of a man who has grown displeased with it. Poor little appleless apple tree. The man has begged for apple pie, and his tree just can't quite deliver. But is it really the tree's fault? The gardener doesn't think so. The gardener thinks that the tree might just not have all the raw materials it needs to do its job. The gardener is hoping that he might be able to turn the tree around with a little love and horse manure. And after all, don't we all just need a little love and horse manure? Now this this would be the feel-good movie of the summer. If Jesus had ended it with the assurance that the tree came back next summer to give the man a bumper crop of the tastiest apples he had ever eaten, thereby securing the tree's place in the man's heart forever and saving its own skin or bark, as the case may be. But Jesus isn't having a happily ever after kind of day. I would say that he's grumpy, but that's probably taking it a bit too